By 1944, World War II had already left much of the world in ruins. Hitler's grip stretched from the Atlantic to deep into Russia. The Soviet Union was holding the line in the east, but at a brutal cost. Some units landed in the wrong place. Others drowned before even reaching land. And yet, this was the moment that cracked Hitler's grip on Europe. These events resulted in D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in human history. So, how did it play out? What went right? What nearly collapsed? And why do so many say this was the day Hitler's defeat began? Hitler knew an invasion was coming, but he didn't know where or when. And that tiny crack in his certainty, that's where the story of D-Day begins. By 1940, Nazi Germany had seized control of most of Western Europe, using a terrifying new tactic known as blitzkrieg, a fast and overwhelming form of warfare. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway fell one after another. The world watched as Hitler's forces advanced deep into Europe, spreading fear and destruction. At Dunkirk, from May to June 1940, hundreds of thousands of Allied troops found themselves trapped on the beaches. Yet, instead of total defeat, a desperate evacuation saved them. Civilian boats and Navy ships rescued over 330,000 soldiers. Then came the Battle of Britain. From July to October 1940, German planes bombed England daily. However, the Royal Air Force remained resolute and thwarted a full-scale invasion. After failing to gain control of the skies, Hitler turned to bombing cities in what became known as the Blitz, a brutal campaign that lasted until May 1941. London burned, yet Britain did not break. In June 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, opening a massive new front in the east. 6 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the US into the war. Germany declared war on America days later, transforming this into a true world conflict. By early 1942, at the Washington Conference, Allied leaders agreed on a Europe-first strategy. Defeating Nazi Germany became the top priority. The US began sending troops and supplies to Britain under Operation Bolero, slowly preparing for a return to mainland Europe. In August 1942, a test raid at Dieppe in France failed. Through 1943, the Allies fought in North Africa and invaded Sicily. These victories opened the door to Italy and provided Allied planners with valuable experience. At the Quebec Conference, the concept of D-Day took shape. Operation Overlord was now the focus. From late 1943 into 1944, preparations accelerated. Mulberry harbors were constructed. Airstrikes weakened German defenses. Troops trained at Slapton Sands. The final invasion date was postponed to June. By May 1944, the invasion fleet began to load. The French resistance was alerted. The weather was monitored closely. On June 3rd, the decision was made. The Allies were fully committed. There was no turning back. On the morning of June 4th, 1944, at 4:15 a.m., Allied commanders gathered for a crucial meeting. The weather over the English Channel had turned rough, with strong winds and poor visibility. These circumstances made the planned invasion of Normandy overly perilous. After much debate, the decision was made to postpone the operation by 24 hours. The massive fleet, already on its way, was ordered to turn back. It was a significant risk, but they couldn't afford to fail. At 6 a.m., German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel left Normandy to visit his wife for her birthday. He believed the stormy weather indicated there would be no invasion. This decision would prove to be a major mistake, as the Allies were still watching for a break in the weather. Later that day, at 1 p.m., a false news report mistakenly claimed that the invasion had already started, causing a brief panic before the error was corrected. By 9 p.m., the weather began to improve suddenly. Meteorologists predicted a brief 36-hour window of clearer skies and calmer seas. The decision was made. D-Day would proceed on June 6th. At 4:15 a.m. on June 5th, the final confirmation arrived. Allied leaders gave the green light. Sealed orders were opened, and soldiers learned where they would land. It was now official. Operation Overlord was underway. By 6 a.m., the first ships departed southern England, heading for France. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., General Eisenhower visited the 101st Airborne to encourage them. At 11 p.m., paratroopers took off, flying into the darkness to secure roads and bridges. Finally, at midnight on June 6th, the invasion fleet crossed the channel. Minesweepers led the way, clearing a safe path. The biggest invasion in history had begun. Just after midnight on June 6th, the first American soldiers entered Normandy. Special paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division, known as Pathfinders, jumped from planes into the dark. Their role was to place beacons on the ground to help guide the main airborne force. These beacons were critical for ensuring that the other paratroopers landed in the correct spots and could find one another. Minutes later, the main group of the 101st Airborne dropped from the sky. However, due to clouds, enemy fire, and poor visibility, many landed miles away from their intended locations. Some paratroopers drowned in flooded fields. Despite this, the survivors fought hard to regroup and carry out their missions. At 2 a.m., the 82nd Airborne Division landed. Their objective was to capture Sainte-Mère-Église, a vital town with roads leading to the coast. Fierce fighting erupted as American troops clashed with German soldiers in the streets. Around 3:35 a.m., British bombers attacked German gun positions along the coast. By 4:05 a.m., the massive Allied fleet offshore commenced preparations. Soldiers climbed down nets into the landing craft. The first wave set off at 4:35 a.m., heading toward Utah Beach. At 5:36 a.m., Allied ships began a powerful naval bombardment of the beach, targeting German bunkers and artillery. Support boats joined in around 6 a.m., firing rockets and machine guns to help clear the way. At 6:30 a.m., the 4th Infantry Division landed. They hit the beach about 1,500 yards south of their original target. This error helped them, as German defenses were weaker in that area. By 8 a.m., General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who had landed with the first wave, made a bold decision: continue landing troops at the new location. Engineers cleared paths through obstacles, and more soldiers followed. Between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m., troops moved off the beach, pushing along narrow roads known as causeways. They faced German fire, but persevered. The 101st and 82nd Airborne continued to fight hard inland, trying to hold off German counterattacks. By evening, more gliders brought in reinforcements. However, by midnight, only 2,250 of the 6,600 paratroopers had reunited with their units. The beach was secure, but the battle for Normandy had only just begun. Thousands were dead or wounded. D-Day came at a high cost, but Utah Beach was a victory. Before sunrise on June 6th, U.S. soldiers in landing craft circled miles offshore, waiting in silence. They were heading to Omaha Beach, one of the most heavily defended areas of the Normandy coast. The Germans had built strong bunkers, machine gun nests, barbed wire, and artillery, all along the bluffs. The Americans knew this landing would be dangerous. At 3:35 a.m., British planes dropped bombs on the German defenses, trying to weaken them, but the results were unclear. Later, at 4:55 a.m., the first wave of landing craft began moving toward the beach. Navy ships started bombarding German positions around 5:50 a.m., trying to help, but some of the German guns fired back and hit their targets. At the same time, specially designed tanks, called DD tanks, were launched into the sea, but most of them sank in the waves before reaching land. Then, at 5:56 a.m., American bombers dropped their bombs too far inland, missing the beach entirely. German defenses were still intact. By 6 a.m., landing craft began firing rockets and guns, but it wasn't enough. When the first U.S. troops hit the beach at 6:30 a.m., they faced deadly machine gun fire and artillery. There were 300 yards of open sand to cross, and many were killed instantly. Meanwhile, at 7:10 a.m., U.S. Rangers scaled the cliffs of Point du Hoc under fire, hoping to destroy German guns. When they reached the top at 7:45 a.m., the guns were gone, but they found them nearby and destroyed them, completing their mission at a high cost. By 8 a.m., some troops slowly began to find gaps in the German lines. U.S. Navy destroyers moved dangerously close to shore and fired directly at enemy bunkers. giving the soldiers a chance to advance. By 11 a.m., a few soldiers reached the top of the bluffs. They were scattered and under fire, but some German defenders started surrendering. At 1 p.m., engineers cleared a road inland at Saint-Laurent, letting U.S. vehicles finally move off the beach. By 8 p.m., more troops had captured nearby villages, and engineers cleared beach obstacles. By midnight, the Rangers still held Pointe du Hoc, but many had died. Omaha was now under U.S. control, but barely. Thousands were killed or wounded. The cost of taking Omaha Beach was immense, but the landing was not in vain. The fight for France had begun. On the morning of June 6th, Canadian forces landed at Juno Beach, one of the key assault zones during the D-Day invasion. The beach was split into two main sectors, Mike's sector in the west and Nan's sector in the east. At 7:50 a.m., in Mike's sector, Canadian assault troops began landing. Due to rough seas, their DD tanks were launched closer to shore and arrived after the infantry. This delay left the soldiers exposed. Many were killed or wounded before they could even leave the water. But the survivors started to push forward. At 8:09 a.m. in Nan's sector, the landing craft hit underwater obstacles and were damaged. The tanks were supposed to land first but arrived late, so the infantry faced direct fire from German pillboxes. The beach turned into a deadly trap, with soldiers struggling to find cover. At 8:43 a.m., the number 48 Royal Marine Commando landed on the eastern side of Juno. They ran into a strong German defensive position and suffered serious losses, but the survivors moved east to support the landing at Sword Beach. By 10 a.m., Canadian troops in Mike's sector had pushed about 3 kilometers inland. In Nan's sector, the battle to clear German defenders from nearby villages continued, but rising tides narrowed the beach, causing traffic jams that slowed down the landing of reserve forces around 11:40 a.m. By 4 p.m., the beach was still crowded. Vehicles and troops were delayed. German tanks launched counterattacks between Sword and Juno, but Canadian forces held their ground and defended their positions. At 7:50 p.m., Canadian units reached Phase Line Elm, about 6 miles inland. While it was a major gain, the final objectives remained out of reach. By midnight, the beachhead was secured, but the eastern flank was still vulnerable. Over 1,200 Canadian soldiers were killed or wounded. The cost was high, but their courage secured Juno Beach. On June 6, 1944, British forces landed at Gold Beach, one of the main targets during the D-Day invasion. The beach was split into two parts, Jig's sector on the west and King's sector on the east. The mission was to break through German defenses, take nearby villages, and link up with other Allied troops. At 3:35 a.m., British RAF bombers attacked German positions to weaken their defenses. Around 5 a.m., large landing ships began lowering smaller craft into the sea. Warships then opened fire on German bunkers to support the landings. By 6 a.m., the first waves of British soldiers moved toward shore. At 7:25 a.m., engineers and special tanks landed first to clear mines and obstacles under heavy fire. 10 minutes later, infantry came ashore. In Jig's sector, many landed off target and met strong resistance. In King's sector, the landings were more accurate, though the village of La Rivière saw heavy fighting. By 1 p.m., British forces had pushed inland, reaching Crépon. By nightfall, they captured Arromanches but failed to take Port-en-Bessin. Over 1,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. Still, a solid beachhead was established, and the push into Nazi-occupied France had begun. On the night before D-Day, British airborne troops from the 6th Airborne Division landed near Sword Beach. Using gliders, they surprised the Germans and captured key bridges over the Caen Canal and River Orne, including Pegasus Bridge. These bridges were crucial to stop German reinforcements from reaching the beach. Soon after, Pathfinder units parachuted in to mark landing zones, but some landed off target, and damaged gear made their task harder. Still, the rest of the 6th Airborne Division parachuted in and secured important roads and gun positions. At 3:35 a.m., British bombers hit German defenses. Then, at 4:30 a.m., No. 9th Parachute Battalion attacked the Merville Battery. Despite heavy losses, they destroyed the guns that threatened the landing force. At 5:30 a.m., Allied warships started bombarding coastal defenses. At 6 a.m., British landing craft set out, and by 7:25 a.m., the 3rd Infantry Division landed under fire. A strongpoint named Cod caused heavy losses, but British troops, with tank support, pushed forward. Commandos landed on both flanks, joining airborne troops inland. By evening, the British had secured their main goals, but the city of Caen remained in German hands. About 1,300 British soldiers were killed and wounded that day. D-Day was more than just a large military attack. It was a turning point in World War II. Thousands of soldiers died, and many civilians in Normandy lost their lives or homes. But their sacrifice made it possible for the Allies to move into Europe and free cities like Paris from Nazi control. Its legacy is still honored today. It stands as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the belief that even in dark times, freedom can win. If you learned something new today, give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves history, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.